Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us on our weekly AJA Zoom event. Welcome to any new people this week, and I'd also like to welcome anybody from our communal organisations who may be watching, so we hope you enjoy the session. We also have people watching on Facebook, and there are some who listen to the audio replay, which is broadcast every Thursday at midday and Sundays at 4 p.m. on J-Air Community Radio. If you're in Melbourne, that's at FM 88, or everywhere else, it's j-air.com.au, so welcome to you all. My name is Alan Freedman. I'm Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association, and also on your screens you will have seen David Adler, who's President of the AJA, as well as our guest for tonight, Giulio Meotti, a journalist based in Italy, and the topic of discussion tonight is Europe's multicultural volcano. The format will be a discussion/interview with Giulio, and then we'll take questions after about half an hour. If you want to ask a question, we remind people that the way to let us know that you want to ask a question is to raise your hand electronically. The way to do that is click the reactions icon at the bottom of the screen. That indicates to us that you want to ask a question, and because we need to give you the option to unmute yourself when the time comes. Now, you can put written questions in the chat function. Robert Gregory, our Director of Public Affairs, will read some of them out during question time. And of course, if you don't like the chat, you can always disable it. Giulio was a guest of ours on Nothing Left. So I'm going to ask Michael to introduce him and kick off the discussion. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Alan. Muslims currently make up about 5% of Europe's population, in all about 26 million. The greatest numbers live in France, 9% of the population, and Sweden, 8%, with only a trace in the countries bordering the eastern boundaries of Europe, such as Poland and Hungary. If the existing high migration were to continue indefinitely, Muslims make up about 14% of Europe's population by 2050. According to one expert, their influence increased from 5% when disproportionately to the general population. And when Muslims approach 10% of the population, they tend to increase lawlessness as a means of complaint about their conditions. Apart from what this may mean for Europe in general, what does it mean for the Jewish communities that have been scattered across Europe for generations? Giulio Meotti is an Italian journalist who writes on Middle Eastern and Jewish issues. He is a strong advocate of Israel and is critical of both the Catholic Church and of Jews who are themselves critical of Israel, regarding them as accomplices of anti-Semites. He wrote an article that appeared online a few months ago in the Gatestone Institute, a wonderful website, titled Europe's Multicultural Volcano. And he joins us now to discuss this. Giulio, thanks so much for your time and welcome to the Australian Jewish Association.
Thank you all. Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
It's been a while since we spoke last. In Australia, unfortunately, even though it was quite a while ago, and nothing has changed either in Europe and in Australia, unfortunately, following along. Giulio, your article is very sobering. So I'm wondering what prompted you to write it? Was it because you were concerned about Italy or Europe in general? And which countries are the most affected and why?
Well, I think this is the most important issue of our time, the rapidly changing of the Western societies through two major patterns. From the Indo-European immigration in the third centuries to the half of the 20th century, Europe usually stood demographically the same. You know, there was no changing in the population, in the society. In the last 50 years, there have been a major seismic movement of population, especially during the 60s and 70s, when there was a big energetic crisis during the Yom Kippur War, and Europe society needed oil from the Saudi Arabia and all the other players, and the established major agreements between these governments, Europe governments, and the Arab countries. Especially France, after the so-called decolonization, after the Algeria war, there was a huge movement of population toward Europe. We have seen the same pattern in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in France, in Sweden. And we have seen in the last, how Europe changed dramatically in the last, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years. I don't mean just the terror attacks. It's if you live in Europe and you don't live in a bubble, I mean, if you don't deny the reality you see with your own eyes, walking in the streets, looking how the major cities are changing, it's the biggest story of our time, as Mark Stein called it in a major book called American Loan. And I'm in Italy, which is a country which is less affected. I mean, this year will be, I think, 100,000 migrants illegally coming to Italy at the end of the year, which is also a major story. But we are about 10, 20 years back in respect to other countries. In the northern part of Europe is more evident. You mentioned the 5%. It's correct, but we have to realize that the biggest changing are taking place in the cities. Take Marseille, the second largest French city. Now it has a Muslim population of about the 30–40%. We don't even know the exact reality because according to the French law, they are not allowed to, to take statistics according to the ethnic and religious roots because of the French past and even the French deportation of Jews to the Nazi Germany. So this is a major taboo, but Marseille is 30–40%. If you take Birmingham, which is the second or third British city for population, it's 30% Muslim. Malmo, the third largest Swedish cities, it's 30%. So you can see, I can go on and go on. So you can see that Europe is rapidly changing. And we are now witnessing a dramatic war between Russia and Ukraine, which is now, I don't know, taking all the attention of the media. But yeah, I think this is the major story because it's one day the war will be over. I don't know if it will be another Cold War in Europe, as some say. But this movement population, this dramatic change in the structure of the society is staying. So we have to keep the focus on what I think is a major story. It's a story which is a taboo too. It's very unpopular to write about this issue in the media, in the mainstream media, because they immediately attack you as an Islamophobe, as a racist, as a fascist, and so on and so on. So it's that is the Volcano, you are even for a journalist, it's very risky to write about these issues. We have been attacked all over in Europe. Journalists, writers, cartoonists have been under siege and police protection. So it's we have seen it's a big story.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Giulio, a couple of questions from me, and then I'll invite David to join the discussion. We're all talking about this migration issue as a problem, and you can see that it's a problem, and we can see that it's a problem. But does Europe see that it's a problem, and do they actually want to do anything about it?
Two reasons. First of all, there is a demographic crisis. We need people. Elon Musk just said a few days ago that this is the most important issue, the collapse of population in the affluent Western societies, not only the Western societies, but South Korea too, all the wealthy societies. And so Europe need babies, and migrants make more babies because they have customs, family structure. They still believe in the future in some way. Even if you read the Italian press, for example, all the major politicians are saying we don't make babies, so we need immigration because the welfare state, the industrial structure, we need people to make the system going on, So they don't invest in demography, for example, as some countries are doing, like Hungary under Viktor Orban. They are trying to make, giving money to the middle class to return to make babies. I don't know if it will be successful or not. And the second reason is that we are under a major violent immigration. I told you 100,000 people are coming to Italy this year. Last year, European Union gave 3 million permits to extra European migrants. So it's huge. It's increasing, and the ruling class also believe that the borders are there to be overcome. It's also an ideological question. They believe that multiculturalism is a major, even if Angela Merkel said it's a failure, even if Boris Johnson said it's a failure, even if Macron, the French president, said we need to rethink about this model. They at the official level, they believe that this is the default position of the so-called establishment. I don't like the term, but that's the story. So this, yeah.
No, sorry, I thought you were finishing. Go on.
Yeah. No. Make the question. Yeah.
Okay. Giulio, I suppose for the last few hundred years, migration and migrants have been a part of modern life all over the world. And generally, migrants integrate into their host societies and become valued citizens. Now, it sounds as if this is not happening in Europe with the Muslim migrants. Is that a fair comment, or is it just some of the Muslim migrants that are not integrating?
Many are integrating. We have seen two parties. The fathers and the grandfathers who came, for example, to France or Belgium or the Netherlands to work for the Renault, Peugeot, or other major industrial societies, they integrated. They didn't think about Islam or Sharia or keeping their own, message of supremacy, because this is an ideological supremacy. They just think to work. But we have seen now that the second and third, even third generations are becoming more close to their own religion. They are not becoming less religious. This is very important because they are not renouncing their habits. They are returning to Islam, political Islam, radical Islam, Islamism, as you want to call it. It's an euphemism, but they are returning to their own roots. So we Italians, we came to the US, but we integrated very well. There were troubles at the beginning, the famous Italian mafia in the US, etc., etc. But in the long term, Irish people, Polish people, Italian people integrated very well because we have the same roots. We believe in the Western society, freedom of expression, pluralism, equality between men and women, separation between church and state, and all the others, pillars of Western civilization. A major minority, because it's a minority, but it is the 30% of Muslims in Europe This is the statistics of the French government. 30% of French Muslims believe that Sharia is above the French secular law. They believe that, and 30%, it's a huge minority. And we know that minorities are able to overcome the systems. There have been the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia and others cases, examples in the last century. So the question of minority is it's not so important. It's we need to understand that if Europe would be strong and confident in its own civilization, this minority will be unable to overcome the system. But the question is the surrender of the cultural elites.
Yes, and just one final point on that theme. What's the welfare situation like for these people? I mean, can they live comfortably on welfare forever?
This is what they are doing in most of Europe countries. They often don't work. They live through subsidies. They live usually in in France they call it the lost territories of the Republic. There was a famous book by the Jewish historian Georges Ben-Sussan who called it the lost territories of the Republic. They live in these huge popular blocks of apartments where even the police don't even dare to enter often. Police, fire workers. Just yesterday, I read a story in the Le Figaro newspaper that the French postal office stopped to serve some neighbors in Marseille because of the security situation. It was a major story. I don't know why it was not in the headlines of other newspapers, but this is the situation. There was a book a few days ago of a professor who, under anonymous, because he doesn't want to meet the same fate of Samuel Paty, the professor who was beheaded 2 years ago in France in front of a school. He is telling the story of his classroom. He writes that he's completely only migrants, third generation of migrants. They believe that when we try to teach about Kant and Enlightenment and all the famous European philosophers, they use the Quran to say this is false. Or the girls that refuse to take off the gloves during the chemical and scientific lessons, or mothers who refuse to send their girls during the outside activities or in the swimming pools because they are not separate between men and women. So stories of parallel societies who are now advancing very fast, because multiculturalism, this is what it's all about. A parallel society is taking place in Europe.
Yeah, thank you. David, do you have any questions at this point?
Sure, thank you, Alan. I want to drill down quickly, Giulio, onto issues of specific concern to the Jewish community. Can you tell me what impact on the streets at various facilities the expression of anti-Semitism exists? And secondly, has it affected European policies towards Israel? We see that some European countries are seen as moderately hostile to Israel, funding organisations, NGOs, and the Palestinian Authority, which is also hostile to Israel. Is this a result of voter demographics? I'd like your comment on those 2 points.
Of course. Take Sweden. In the last 10, 15, 20 years, Sweden has been the most aggressive country against Israel in Europe. I think because of also the demographic change, the social democrats in power in Sweden depends from the migrants' vote. And they give them the anti-Israel hate, anti-Israel propaganda, or the pro-Palestinian propaganda. We have seen it very, very clearly in France too, where the most surprising vote was for Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the radical left. He is very anti-Israel. His party, La France Insoumise, during summer presented a parliamentary vote against the apartheid of Israel and for the boycott of the Israeli products in Judea and Samaria. Jean-Luc Mélenchon was collecting during the last presidential turnout the Muslim votes. 80% of Muslims in France voted for Mélenchon. So if 2 plus 2 it make 4, it's very easy to understand how this demographic change is affecting the Europe position. If you take, for example, the Eastern Europe countries like Hungary, which had very few Muslim migrants because it's very restrictive about immigration, is one of the most pro-Israel governments in Europe. Italy too is still have a pro-Israel government. It depends from the majority, but and on the street levels, the situation is very bad. We have seen just in the last year, we have seen 3 Jews who have been killed in France by Muslim neighbors. A few days ago, a Tunisian Jew born in Tunisia, Haddad, was killed by a Muslim neighbor. We don't know if the anti-Semitism was the major cause of the attack, but he referred to being an anti-Israel militant, and there was stories in the press about being very aggressive against the Jews. The anti-Semitism depends from country to country. Belgium, for example, is very bad. I don't think Jews have a future in Belgium, except for the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox in Antwerp. They are a very close community. They make many children, and they usually tend to be very, close to each other. Malmo, for example, it will be which had a population of I think 10,000 Jews. Now it's about 500. They say people are leaving very, very, very fast. France too, about 20 years ago, had a population of 500,000 people, Jewish community. Now they are 400,000. So they lost about 100,000 Jews in just 20 years. It depends year for year. After Toulouse attack, when the 3 Jewish children were killed with their father, there was a major aliyah to Israel, Quebec, and other countries. 10,000 people left, and the year after was down about 7,000. So, but which is the future of a community in which people are killed in the streets? They cannot wear the kippah or the Magen David, or they have to hide their symbols, where synagogue and schools are to be protected by the army 24 hours all the day, all the year. So I don't see any future. Like maybe in Germany, still the situation is still a little back, but we don't know. It can rapidly change. There have been many attacks also there. And but the story you have to focus on Europe is France. France is the 3rd largest Jewish community in the world after Israel and US.
Yes.
So what happens in France? It would be the how do you say thermometer in English? The barometer of the future of the Jewry in Europe, I think.
Well, President Macron seems to be trying to push back at the moment. He's expelled some radicals. He's closed a few of the more radical mosques. He's making a stand on French culture. Do you think it's having any effect? Is he able to turn things around at all, Giulio?
He's very good in these issues, I think. He was trying to be more restrictive on immigration. He expelled, I think, I don't know if 20 or something like that during his term, Salafist imams. He closed some mosques. He tried to pass a so-called separatism bill, in which he tried to destroy this parallel society. But I'm a little bit skeptic about the real consequence on the society of these measures. I think more drastic would be needed. I don't know. I'm very pessimistic in the long term, because we are facing
too late.
We are facing a major movement inside the European society. De-Christianization. Europe is losing its own religion, and churches are closing. The structure of the society is changing, and people don't even care about their own culture. You know, it's not even a major story in the media, in the mainstream. You know, they are focusing on something else.
Okay. Well, just one more question before we open up. We know that there have been a lot of violence, terror attacks, either small or occasionally large scale. And sometimes we see the authorities and the media going to extraordinary lengths to avoid identifying the cause, to avoid saying that this is motivated by Islam. They'll talk about mental health or having to do an investigation or any other excuse. Why is that? Why do the authorities, the police, and sometimes the media have so much trouble in Europe identifying the motive when to an outside observer it seems number one on the list?
Two reasons: cowardice, because cowardice is very popular in Europe at the moment, and fear also. In May, a teacher in Marseille was killed in front of a school, in front of his children, a Catholic medical officer, Alban Gervais, and he was killed by a Muslim who said he did it for Allah. And the story was buried in the media. Just a few, 2-3 channels covered the story. Even in Israel was covered. But the story was a source of embarrassment for this fashion, because it was under the election. There was the second term of presidential election. Even in the case of Sarah Halimi, the French Jew who was killed a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, the judge decided to not prosecute the killer because he smoked cannabis.
Yeah, I remember that.
So if in Europe you smoke cannabis, you drive and you kiss someone, you go in prison with a much more penalty, because it's under alcohol or drug or other addiction. If you kill a Jew, you smoke cannabis, you don't get prosecution. That's the atmosphere. It's crazy. I don't get it. It's not a rational explanation. I think cowardice and fear of the retribution. They know they can attack in any time. Think about Salman Rushdie in New York. True. 30 years after the fatwa, he was not protected. Nobody thought that Iran was able to implement the fatwa after so many years, after someone said, no, the fatwa vanished. Now it's we have seen the fact that they don't forget. And they don't forget, and politicians and media, they know very well the lesson, I think.
Okay.
You can open up.
Yeah, okay. Just before we go to questions, David, I'll hand back to you, and you can tell us what's happening next week, and then we'll open up to questions, and we've got a full half an hour.
Okay, well, as we always do, if there's anyone here who is not yet actively supporting AJA, once this session is finished, please go on to our website, jewishassociation.org.au, where you can subscribe to the emails, you can apply for membership, make a donation, whatever you're able to do. It's all very helpful. Next week is a little different. We're not actually having a Zoom event, but we do have a special event at the New South Wales Parliament, and we will try to simultaneously live stream it onto Facebook. We've got a child Holocaust survivor Eddie Boas, recording his story, being interviewed by Carolyn Marcus, a friend of ours from Sky News Australia. If you want to go to that, if you're in Sydney, be at the Parliament House Theatre by 6 p.m. for a 6:30 p.m. start. How you book for that will be covered in our next email, and Eddie Boas will be telling his story of survival.
Thanks, David. Yes, and of course, we did have Eddie on as a guest a few months ago. So for those that didn't see him, this is a good opportunity to catch up. Okay, we'll open up for questions. I'll just remind everybody to keep questions brief as you can. I've got Ron and Elaine, Hugh and Andy. So Ron, you're up first. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, good evening, Giulio.
Good evening.
Hi, thank you for your explanation. You've described the problem of unfettered Muslim immigration into Europe, but to me it seems like it's receptive to that, because Europeans have drifted into a culture of post-Christian hedonistic kind of society. How can that be reclaimed? And is Salvini part of the answer?
Well, how to be reclaimed? This is a major, there is now a discussion, you know, the last Pope, Pope Benedict, said that Christianity will return to the minority in Europe. I mean, maybe we have to pass through, the desert and to reclaim the next civilization as 2,000 years ago. I don't know. The system is now collapsing very, very rapidly. The family structures, the cultural structure, educational, and as you mentioned, the post-Christian hedonistic society. That's the story. Michel Houellebecq, for example, depicted very, very well in his novels the atmosphere in Europe. Some countries are lost, like in, I don't know, Sweden, Belgium. We have read every day about dozens of churches who have been closed or sold or converted, and the numbers are falling very rapidly. Secularization is in the future of Europe, I think. Secularization and Islam, which is not a nice mix, you know, because when you have a strong identity, you are able to confront with a strong civilization. Salvini is now very, I think he's going down at the moment. The next election in a couple of weeks, I think Meloni, which is the right-wing female politician, will be elected prime minister if there are not surprises, and Salvini will be part of the coalition. Salvini understood the Australian model of immigration could be an example for Europe. So try to control the border, being restrictive, not opening your beaches and shores to whoever want to come from Africa. But I think we don't have the same political stamina and willingness to implement that model.
Giulio, you mentioned the Pope. How influential is the Pope? Because this current Pope seems very, very Islam friendly. So is the Pope a person of great influence that could actually turn things around if he wanted to?
You know, I wrote a book in Italian, which was translated in Spanish and Polish, other languages, about Pope Benedict. I titled the book "The Last Western Pope." Pope Benedict, Pope Ratzinger, was the German guy, theologian, intellectual, was a major figure of culture, European culture. But I think his pontificate was the last, you know, in which the West, the survival of the West was at stake, and the Catholic Church was interested in preserving Western civilization. Pope Francis is from Argentina. He doesn't care about Western Europe. He doesn't even know Europe very well. He doesn't make pilgrimage. He doesn't make travels, for example, in Europe as the last Pope, the Polish one and the German one did. He's interested in so-called global village. And, you know, for example, Catholics in the Philippines or in Africa, South America. So from my point of view, it's not so good because I'm interested in the survival of Europe, not in Jakarta or Buenos Aires. So he's too oriented about the global village, you know, and not on Europe's survival and Europe's future.
Yes, and of course he's there until he dies, so that could be a long time.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, Anne, please unmute yourself and ask your question, and then it's Elaine.
Thank you, Giulio. What is the real story with the no-go zones in the central parts of major European cities?
Well, when Donald Trump said there are no-go zones in Europe, he was attacked and blamed and demonized, and he was called an idiot because he said, "Oh, European class said no, there are no-go zones in Europe." Now we know there are dozens of these zones. The Sweden state, for example, keep a list of 60 no-go zones in Sweden. When you say no-go zones, we imagine districts or areas where police or authorities cannot enter. This is not true. There are areas in which it's very risky for police to make operation, for ambulances to enter to make their services. So areas in which people avoid, for example, there are statistics of women in Sweden that refuse to go in some district like Rosengard in Malmö. It's the most famous one. But in France, there are dozens of these areas. Last spring, there was a major journalistic service about a couple of these cities. Trapp, for example, is a very famous one. And also in the UK, there are some districts in the major cities of Birmingham, Manchester, which are heavily Islamicized, and where, but you know, no-go zone I don't think it's a good definition. I prefer lost territories, lost to the state, lost to the rule of law, lost to the European culture. You go there, you're not in Europe. You see women in abaya, like the Saudi Islamic skirt, you know, and you see people with birds, and Muslims are the majority in the schools, for example. So it's the post-Europe, you know. In Europe, you have dozens and hundreds, maybe. There was a list about 5 years ago in France about 700 of these so-called, they called it sensible areas. They called it ZUS, Z-U-S. But we don't know the exact number. It's impossible to keep a list because the authority refused to face the reality, I think.
Thank you. Elaine, your turn. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Let me do that. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are. We can hear you. Thanks.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Hello, what am I going to say? What did I want to say? I'm a huge fan of yours. Shalom, Giulio. I'm a huge fan of yours, and also I've been a guest of Gatestone Institute, who you write for so prolifically. Thank you very much for your incredible articles. Grazie. Okay, I'm in the UK at present, where we have 3.4 million Muslims, being 6.3% of the population. Just for balance, the Jewish population is 0.5%. There are nearly 2,000 mosques here, including one on a remote Shetland island. Some mosques have dawah cafes, which, as you know, dawah is a means of conversion or proselytization. In Italy, do you see dawah taking place on street corners, as I see in both UK and Australia? And also, would you care to comment on halal, which, as you know, is a $1 trillion industry, possibly backing terrorism?
Well, in Italy, there was not the dawah of from the side of the Muslim Brothers, as in UK or Belgium or Brussels or Rotterdam or other places. Because, as I said at the beginning, we are still back 15, 20 years. We are coming. We are just late, you know. We are part of the same story, but we are a little bit at the periphery of this major clash of civilization or shock of civilization. But you know that Qatar, there was a book in France called about the Qatari penetration. Qatar decided that Italy is the first country to invest with mosques, dozens of mosques, cultural projects, Islamic schools in the southern Italy. There was a project a couple of years ago of a Muslim school. I think because they believe that we are I would say, soft belly. We are the soft belly of Europe, and Europe is the soft belly of the West. So as in the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, Rome was chosen to host the biggest mosque in Europe, built by Saudi Arabia. Now we are seeing that the Qatari authorities, Turkish authorities, are investing lots of millions of euros in my country and in the rest of Europe. So the Dawah, as Ayani Shiali said, is probably the most major threat from the Islamic fundamentalist side, even more than terror attacks, because we don't see the threat. It's more sinuous. It's invisible. People don't perceive it as a threat. So it's more complicated to fight it.
Was there another part to your question, Elaine? No, okay. All right, thank you. Hugh, please unmute yourself. Hugh is in the UK also.
Yes, I am. And I'm also a member of AJA as well. Very proud to be so. Giulio, like Elaine, she actually sends me your articles and I enjoy reading them. But my question is slightly different. It seems to me that in Europe, we're facing a situation like 1938 all over again, where we have this regime in Iran that is not only threatening Israel and all Jews, but actually really a threat to Europe. It's only a matter of time before they've got a ballistic missile with a nuclear warhead that they could use against Europe. What do you think is driving Europe to sign this suicidal nuclear deal with Iran?
Great question. Sacrificing Israel? Maybe, as a German psychiatrist said, the Europeans will never forget the Jews for Auschwitz. Sense of guilty? I don't know. We are in the psychological arena discussion, you know, it's very complicated. Or maybe, you know, fear of retribution, as I said at the beginning. Salman Rushdie as a major Iranian deal. The case of Rushdie as a, you know, little story of a major one, you know, and they have fear. When the Iranian president visited Rome 4 years ago, the Italian authorities, the Italian government, covered the naked statues in the Rome Museum to not offend the Iranian head of state, the Iranian president. So that moment, I understood we are facing a major self-censorship of civilization, a cancel culture of civilization. So the Iranian deal, I think it's the part of this trend. So the Iranians will get the bomb unless the Israelis will refuse to let them have. So just Israel can prevent that major catastrophe.
Yeah, just before we come to Andy and then Robert, Giulio, in thinking about Iran, Iran is Shia, and I would imagine most of the Muslims that are coming to Europe are Sunni. So how is this playing out? So is there any tension between the Shia and the Sunni in Europe, or how's it working?
Well, there are tensions between Chechens, people coming from Chechnya, and, for example, between Turks and Armenians. There have been attacks in France, not in the interreligious sense that we have seen, for example, in Iraq, with major clash between the two communities. But you have to remember that in the laptop of the terrorists who murdered the Charlie Hebdo cartoonist and journalist in Paris, they were two Sunni terrorists, the Kawashi brothers. The police found the fatwa of Iran of Khomeini against Salman Rushdie. So the fatwa, Rushdie fatwa, was the first major shot against the Western civilization, and the Sunni just took the mantle to proceed with these attacks. The people have been killed by Al Qaeda fans, by ISIS Daesh fans. So I don't see this is the major story, the division between Sunni and Shia. They take whatever fit their agenda, I think.
Okay, Andy, please unmute yourself and fire away.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like Qatar and Iran, for example. Yeah.
Yeah.
We hear the word Islamic phobia often. I know when I was in America after 9/11, it was the Muslims. They were the victims. Now, of course, as you mentioned, the press doesn't mention if a Muslim was a terrorist. What does Islamic phobia mean? Does it mean that we're afraid of the Muslims? Or the Muslims are afraid of us?
Islamophobia was the term invented by Muslim brothers to shut the mouth of the critics of Islam. That was the greatest definition. It's an industry. It's a major industry of manifestos, proclaims. There is the Day Against Islamophobia at the European Parliament, and from the United Nations part, there's lots of money coming to these organizations, youth organizations that, for example, go to Brussels, to the European Parliament, to fight against racism and discrimination against Islam. And the European officials are on their side. So I think Islamophobia, I don't know what you call Islamophobia. It's Christopher Hitchens, a word created by fascists and used by cowards to manipulate morons. We Europeans are the morons. The cowards are in the elite, and the fascists are very good to manipulate European conscience, sense of guilty for the Holocaust, sense of guilty for the colonialism. We tear down the statues of even Edmund Burke, the British philosopher. There was a discussion in the UK a few days ago to destroy the statue of this major thinker. So it's Islamophobia is very. It's like I told you, it's an industry. If you follow the news from Brussels, every day there is a dossier about Islamophobia. If they have to make the day of inclusion, they usually use a girl with the hijab because they want to normalize the veil. They never start programs against female mutilation, forced marriages, honor killings. This is the taboo. There was a story in France a few days ago in Le Figaro about the boom, the record of female mutilation and fibulation in France, in the French territory. And it was not a major story. The story is the inclusion of veil. The city of Grenoble, for example, decided to allow the burkini in the public swimming pool because to please the Muslim electorate. So I think it's a major alliance. We just see the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, Robert, in a moment, but Elaine was going to ask you about the halal industry and whether that is a major funder of terrorism. What do you think about that, Giulio?
Halal as the food, or
yes, the whole certification process.
I don't know if a major source of terrorism. I know that many European cities, their mayors and are adopting the halal for example, in the schools. For example, the green mayors are now very active in adopting the halal in the school mayor, or they adopt the vegan menu, because so they make they are okay with them because they are vegan, and they make okay the Muslims because there is no pork. So it's a major story too, and it's like the veil with in the fashion industry. Every day there is a hijab or veil from the Nike or all these major sport societies. So it's a way to normalize the symbols of political Islam.
Yeah. Okay, Robert, have you got some written questions, please?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of questions. Someone wants to know what's Geert Wilders up to, what's he doing? And then another question, you touched upon the Jews, the future of Jews in Europe. What's the current situation? How many Jews are left? Are they moving to Israel, and why are the ones remaining there continuing to stay there?
Well, Geert Wilders is very brave. I met him in the Netherlands about 12 years ago, and I have seen probably the most protected man in Europe. It's incredible, the apparatus of security bodyguards searching for pens and even the books. It's a dead man walking. They want to kill it from Pakistan to Iran. So he has my respect. I don't know if he's a major figure now. I think his star is going a little bit down, but that's my political feeling. About the future of Jewry, as I said, France is the topic to follow it. In Italy, there are about 20,000 Jews. It's nothing. In Belgium too, it's not big numbers. Sweden too. Germany now has a major Jewish population because the Ukrainian war. Many Ukrainian Jews left to Germany too, so there may be a future of the Jewish community because of the war. I think, as I said, that it's declining, the number. It's declining for one reason. It's the birth rate. Jews are, even the not religious one, are like the rest of the population, and the assimilation is very strong. And I think because there will be an increasing wave of anti-Semitism. As long as the Muslim population will increase, anti-Semitism will increase too, because we decided as Europe to import this hate from the Middle East. And I think I'm very pessimistic. I wrote a book titled Europe Without Jews, and in which I try to collect all these stories of each country and each phenomenon. After, for example, the attack in Toulouse, half of the Jewish community left the city, and even a single traumatic attack can mean the aliyah, or the exile of an entire community because of the trauma. So we don't know.
Okay, Jeff, we'll take your question, so please unmute yourself, and then we might slip back to David.
Shalom. You mentioned earlier that the dichotomy of cowardice and fear as the reason for the French being so gutless. How about the trichotomy of including jealousy? Because the US and Israel are the small and the large devils, respectively, best encapsulated by David Brooks in his wonderful essay Amongst the Bourgeoisie Poets. So at least there's a third major reason, pure jealousy and venomous hatred that's typical of the French historically. What do you think of that?
I agree with you. We are envy of Israel, for example. We envy a state that make babies, that it's strong, that has an identity, that protects its borders, that defends itself, and that is a major high-tech player. European economy is declining and stagnation. And so in a situation of decline, I think jealousy can be a major factor, you know, of the relation between civilizations.
Yeah. David, have you got any further questions?
Yeah, I want to ask you just one, Giulio, about human rights organisations, and particularly the left of politics, that on the one hand seems very interested in human rights, but when it comes to honour attacks against women and girls within the Islamic community, or the persecution of homosexuals, or female genital mutilation, you could go on. All the human rights organisations, the NGOs, are silent. What's going on?
Well, take the example of the LGBT organizations. They are so woke, so imbued with this strange ideology that they cancel the attacks against the Jews or against LGBT people in Europe by the Muslims, because there is the alliance between the woke movements and the Muslim movements in the name of decolonization, in the name of to attack. They hate Western society more than they care about their own members, I think. So, for example, it's the same about the attacks from their side against the Israeli democracy, and they overcome the fate of the Palestinian LGBT people running and fleeing Gaza or the Judea and Samaria West Bank to Israel. So these human rights organizations are the same, for example, that in Germany, they attack and blame and they criticize two major Muslims, liberal Muslims, Ahmed Abdel Samad and Seyran Aids. The first is from Egypt and the second from Turkey. They are secular Muslim. They have been under police protection in the last 20 years, 15 years, and they have been attacked by this human rights organization as racists, Islamophobes, and fascists. So they have to protect themselves from the Muslim fanatics, and they have to protect themselves from the criticism of many of these leftist organizations. So it's a surreal situation.
It is indeed. We tend to call it the sort of red-green alliance. And
red-green alliance.
Yeah,
One day will be, red rationem, as the Romans said. The clash will be between them. We have seen it, for example, in the UK, where many Muslim parents refuse to let pupils and children to let go in some schools because of the LGBT lessons. Okay. And there will be a clash one day. But for now, they are allied each other. Yeah.
Thank you. Just before we finish up, Giulio, I know Italy was often the first port of call for illegal immigration from Northern Africa. Is that still going on, or have the Italian authorities clamped down and done something about it?
If you want to come from Libya or Tunisia, just take the boat and come. Nobody will stop you. So we have days in which 300, 400, 500 people, all men, all in their 20s and 30s are coming without women and children. So we see these boats and these NGOs with their boats, usually NGOs from Germany. Many of these guys who rescue migrants are the German good guys. And they just let Italian authorities, just during the Salvini time, they closed the borders, there was a clash, but the Italian judges prosecuted Salvini for closing the borders. So we are fighting with one hand in the back. So it's a major disaster, I told you. And there are days in which very few are coming, for example, 50 or 80 people, but every day people are coming, every day.
Wow. Okay. It's a very unpleasant thought. It's hard to imagine Europe without Europeans, but it seems as if that's where we may be ending up. Giulio, I'll ask Michael to just say goodbye in a moment, but thank you for taking such a brave and principled stand. We mentioned that your articles appear in the Gatestone Institute. If anybody wants to read Giulio's articles, he's not hard to find. Just Google him and they'll turn up everywhere. Michael, do you want to just say goodbye to Giulio on behalf of the AJA?
Yes, Giulio, is it buonanotte? Is that the right thing to say?
Yeah,
and,
right there.
And I have to say, Giulio, you're one of my personal favourite guests, and your English is excellent. And on behalf
I try
of
to do myself.
Yeah, you really are good. Read, everybody read Giulio's articles. Just Google Giulio Meotti. And thank you very much on behalf of the Australian Jewish Association.
Thanks,
Thank
Michael.
you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Just before we go, the L'Chaim program with Morris Klein is on right now. It's on 3ZZZ on FM 92.3 or 3ZZZ.com.au. That's all we have for tonight. Join us next week with Eddie Boaz, but at the earlier time of 6:30 p.m. Don't forget you can keep up to date with what AJA is talking about on our Facebook page. We ask you to please like it and share it widely. But for now, we wish you all a very good evening and look forward to seeing you again next week and ongoing. Thank you, everybody. Good night to Giulio and good night to you all. Bye for now.